yeah, there's just like, for me, like, every like art form, like music or poetry or like, or whatever, like has its strengths and weaknesses. And like for me, painting has, I'm not the most like verbal person. Like, so for me, it's like, I can like say things in the work that I really just don't have words for. And like, and I've had people like say that they've shared those experiences. So I know that it's possible.
Welcome to the Artelligence Podcast. Live Art's look behind the scenes at how the global art market really works. I'm your host, Marion Maneker. This podcast is brought to you by Live Art, the global art marketplace that puts you in control. Download the Live Art app to get all of the most relevant art market information, as well as access to exclusive private sales. Or visit us at liveart.io. Austin Lee is known for his meticulous use of technology to make physical artwork that captures the experience and aesthetic of digital culture. Lee uses traditional methods to recreate digital images in physical form. It's unexpected, and his work is like no one else's. His new show at Jeffrey Deitch is called Like It Is. It contains paintings in his signature vibrant colors, videos, sculptures, and an augmented reality experience. The show is up until the end of April. Austin Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
So you have a show up right now at Jeffrey Deitch. I think it's your second show, solo show with Deitch. And I wonder, we should start, just give us a commercial for what the show is like. It looks very intense with the red and blue walls and all. So I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so basically, yes, the second show I've done with Jeffrey, and I guess that last show was maybe 2 to 3 years ago now. Like, and it's like basically the last show was before the pandemic, and this one is after, which for me feels like, even though that's a normal time in between shows, like it kind of feels like a lifetime difference. And I guess like for me, the show deals with a lot of the stuff that I've just like kind of like dealing with during that time, or just like some mental shifts and some like new awarenesses, like just like a lot of introversion. I think my painting changed a lot. Like, so for me, it's like just a lot of like personal growth in that time period. And so it's the first show that I'm really like showing that all together in like one body of work. And yeah, I think for me, it's like it's an important show. It's like probably one of my, I think, most important like favorite shows that feels like a really comprehensive kind of look at all the things that I do, like with video, sculpture, painting. Like I made a book for the show that has all the sketches and drawings. So yeah, it feels like a lot of things I've been like working towards and trying to do, but like feels like maybe people have closer access to it in a way that like I always thought it was there, but maybe it's clearer for other people now. Maybe it's clearer for myself too over that time period. And so then other people can see like kind of some of those connections that I'm making in one show, like where like I would just kind of deal with different ideas over like longer expanses of time, and like it's all now like in one body of work that I think people can see those connections like between digital and physical and like those ideas.
Well, is that the overarching theme that brings it together? The title of the show is Like It Is, and I'm assuming it isn't a song reference. It is more about this, your main theme of digital versus real life and representation. But is that like, you feel like it's more fully realized and integrated, all of these pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never like am dealing just one thing. I never want like the work to be like didactic in like one particular way. Like they're just, for me, it's always like just different things that I'm thinking about. Like that's like one major aspect of my work that I think has been long term, is like trying to figure out like what like digital is, like how that exists in the world. And like for the longest time in the past, I would always make like a physical like manifestation of like a digital image or object. And that's been really consistent, like where I've always been really interested in like digital images and aesthetics, and then but tried to like figure out ways to make that like connected with painting or with like my like off the computer experience. And so that's like been a major part of the work. And like I think for me, like even dealing with like humanity like within that, like with how we use computers, and like a lot of my another core of my work is like I think like the emotional aspect of like being a human, and how that's like where they kind of meet is like where I'm interested in, like where like humanity and like computers intersect. um so I think this show kind of like deals with that in a little bit like straightforward way than maybe before, which it's always been there, but like I would touch on that in different ways.
Because like there's one painting of two figures embracing. There are images that are more about I guess figures in various emotional states. Is that what you mean by the displaying the humanity? Because what's so interesting about your work is there's a huge element of the uncanny in your work, and a part of the uncanniness is that sometimes it's just emotional and almost childlike in its direct emotions, and at other times it's so unreal that it's hard to view of in human terms. But that uncanny is what seems to keep it right on the knife's edge.
Yeah, I mean, the uncanny is something I'm really interested in, is like the like I think that is kind of disarming sometimes with the work, like where like that's usually a lot of times where the work like starts, where it's like asking like what is this, or like something that feels unfamiliar, kind of exploring that. And like even for me, like with like the digital aesthetic in the beginning, like when I started exploring that, like maybe like in 2004 or something, like 2005, like when like I just started like noticing that like kind of aesthetic in the world, and it was mostly in computers. It wasn't like kind of spreading everywhere yet. And so for me, that uncanny like is connected to like what I'm interested in painting. Also, like there's like my favorite painting is like Ginevra de Bency. It's in the National Gallery in DC. It's like a Leonardo painting, and it's just like this kind of space that feels unreal. Like it's like it doesn't feel like a photograph. It doesn't feel like real life. It's like this other kind of thing. So for me, I'm always like searching for that, like that feeling. And the computer is like a way to get there, like where it's like that, what is this kind of feeling? And that, what's been surprising for me is how that changes over time too. Like something that might feel uncanny 10 years ago for me can like become familiar, and then it doesn't have that feeling. So that's something in my work that I'm always trying to like figure out, like what, like poke at that kind of stuff. But like with the emotional part, like I just think that's to me like what art is about in itself, like is about like a human being expressing themselves in some kind of form, and trying to share that with other people. And so for me, that has been like always as a core. Like I think this is a core of like making art, making in general. And I think early on, like, or I felt, I guess I felt like a lack of that in like a digital space in the like in the beginning. And whether it was conscious or not, I think I would try to bring that into the work, and like, or just be like real about that. Like if I try to be like really straightforward and honest about like whatever I'm feeling or thinking about. Where like, 'cause so often I think online there's like you kind of have this like disconnect from people, and like that it's still like really influencing all of our lives in major ways, and like we're communicating more than ever with people online and in different ways, but yet like it feels really not connected. Or
That's a significant point. One of the main features of the world online is the lack of sincerity. There are so many, I don't even want to call them people. We've got bots, but there are so many things you encounter online that you cannot trust whether they are what they say they are. I mean, it's only with the growth of online communication that we get the concept of catfishing. It's not like people weren't fraudulent before, but we now have a word for this idea of not being who you say you are. It's so common. And it sounds to me part of what you're kind of trying to get at here is, how do you pierce through that insincerity with some sort of authenticity, and yet still make it appear to be and have the aesthetic, I guess is the best word for it, of digital life?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't like try to do that. I just like am doing that. I think like that's I think what being authentic is like I am just someone who's like immersed in digital culture and the world, and that comes in the work. And I just really try to be authentic in what I'm doing. So I just think that for me is it's important like for today. Like, but I guess like one thing you think about, like even like how like memes or like the rise of like even emoticons and stuff, how like I just think those really show that like need or desire for those things, and like they like those are like born out of a necessity to like to communicate, because like you in real life or even for us, like we have like a we can see each other on the video camera. Like I think so much of like your normal everyday like interactions with people, like you have all these like subtle ways of understanding, like of like someone's facial expression, their body language, all these like kind of really important ways of communicating that like are lost online. So there's this, it seems like it'd be like to be like a real need or desire to like figure out like new like ways that people can connect more in those spaces. And for me, like I definitely like I don't know if I have like the answers, but like I definitely try to just like poke at like pointing that out, like how that's important.
Well, that's another fascinating thing. I mean, you're asking a lot of painting when you try to do that, right? When you try and if I can if I'm getting what you just said right, that this whole new digital way of communicating has launched, whether it's memes or emoticons or other ways of communicating the emotions that you normally get by actually tone of voice, inflection, emotions, and all of that is sort of stripped away, and we've recreated digitally new ways of doing that. And you're sort of taking those cues and trying to take two steps further, because painting has always had that both opportunity and hurdle to overcome, right? That's one of the great challenges of art and its huge successes, the ability to capture on canvas either an image of a person or a scene and communicate a lot more than just a photographic representation of it. That's the difference between a Leonardo and a lesser, old master painter and all. And I think that. I guess maybe that's part of that uncanny element of your paintings, is they are sort of shot through with emotion.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I think that is the strength of painting. Like that's why I love painting. Like I think it goes beyond even like it's painting has a way of like saying things that can't be said in any other way. It's like it's like kind of like I always think of it as it kind of sparks something in the viewer, like that makes like their own gears start turning, and then they think their own thoughts, and it helps them like kind of internally arrive at something. You're not like just telling them what to think. It's like more of a like kind of like guiding, like kind of like poking at something and then letting the viewer kind of explore that on their own, which I think is like a deeper way for someone to understand something than just being like told something. And like yeah, there's just like for me like every like art form like music or poetry or like or whatever like has its strengths and weaknesses. And like for me painting has I'm not the most like verbal person, like so for me it's like I can like say things in the work that I really just don't have words for. And like and I've had people like say that they've shared those experiences, so I know that it's possible.
That was going to be my next question. I mean, you've got collectors, you have shows, and people talk to you about your art. What is it they say to you?
I mean, it's kind of all over the place, but like I definitely, it's, for me, the most touching is always this like someone who will like there'll be like a specific painting or something that like speaks to them, or like I have like one friend who like would just like send me like text messages of like an older painting that they had found and just say that they really like keep looking at it and telling me what they think about it. I've had that happen like over like a few people here and there in like pretty like deep ways that will for me be really like interesting, like where it's like this like people have their own experience with the work. Or even I actually just recently, I think it was just like yesterday or something, I was looking up an older painting that I had online, and then this Tumblr account came up that had reviewed one of my older shows, and then I was like reading their review of the show, and I had like new insight to my own work that like they were kind of touching on at the time, and I don't think I understood what they were saying when I had first read it. maybe had like blocked out certain things. And then when I read it now, I'm like, wow, it's like really, they really were in tune with what was going on, things that I was maybe subconsciously dealing with that I wasn't like able to consciously understand. So even for me, like I think I'm like a viewer of my work in this other way too. Like whereas I change or throughout time, like I can review the work and understand it in different ways. Like I kind of always just want the work to be like a vessel of like just like connecting with feelings that like like you have different experiences throughout your life, and then something might make sense in a different way at a different time because your life has changed, or you've had different you maybe didn't understand something, but some new experience illuminates it.
Deitch has called you a pop artist, or likened you to pop artists. You in some of your commentary have sort of cited Alex Katz as an artist you admire, and he's very much one of those. He's not really a pop artist, but he's often lumped in with the pop artists. And I was sort of I was curious to hear, more about the artists that you mentioned Leonardo earlier, but the artists that you're just interested in. You don't have to necessarily either admire them or draw inspiration from them, but just artists that you look at. But then I also wanted to talk about this sort of idea of like, is digital the contemporary or the analog to what pop was 60 years ago? It's amazing how long ago pop art was.
I just kind of make the work, and I don't really think about labels too much, like within that, like where I love the idea of the work being like able to connect with like a broad like amount of people. Like I never want my work to feel like limited in that, like, or like exclusive or something. Like I definitely like love the artists that can connect in broad ways, like someone like Murakami. I think like that kind of like dealing with like the low and high ends of culture. Like I really kind of do love that. Or like Keith Haring's like one of my favorite artists, and like even like looking back at like how he dealt with like the pop shop and dealing with like kind of like more mass culture like ways to put your work out in the world in those ways. So for me, I think that's like really interesting, and like especially now, like I just think like there's such a basically like a overlap between everything that for me feels like the most interesting is like the overlap between. I don't feel like there is a huge distinction between different types of art making, and it's so easy for everything to influence each other that it's like really quickly just like a big soup of culture. I think that for me, like is more what I'm kind of in tune with, is like trying to just understand what I'm seeing in the world and relating to that.
You've done prints with Pace. You mentioned the pop shop, and immediately makes me curious about this whole trend for making toys or other sort of collectible objects and all. But also, the pop shop certainly brings to mind, in the '80s when Haring was doing that. I mean, it was on him to open a little outpost down in NoHo and make the sweatshirts and the materials that he wanted to sell. But now we have this whole thing about collabs where there are all sorts of brands that want to work with artists as a way of achieving the same thing. Is that sort of something you think about doing, have hopes of doing, or is it just if it came along you would do it? Or I guess what I'm asking is there a master plan to dominate the world, or is it just you keep working and you see what happens?
Yeah, I guess I have more of a master plan not to dominate the world. I think that's like not the goal for me at all. But I do think sometimes that stuff can be interesting. I think I'm like a little bit like difficult, and like I've definitely tried to do like see if I can make connections like that work. Sometimes like when people reach out to me pretty often for that stuff, and I'm usually I would say I'm like pretty open minded, but I feel like I'm like uncompromising and like what the work should be. So sometimes it just doesn't work out. I would just like go along and try to figure out if it can work and be open minded. But I think the work has to be like something that like you like the work is at the center. And like I think sometimes it's just with brands or something, they might like it depends on the brand, but they might have different kind of incentives than the artist might have. So it's like if it aligns, it's great. And I think if like a brand can like do something positive with the work or in general, like then that's cool. Like I'm not opposed to that, but I'm not like actively seeking that out either. Like for me, it's more like if it makes sense and if I can be true to myself then I'm like down, and I'll like kind of go along that path and see what happens. But yeah, I haven't like had too much where like anything came into fruition. Like I've definitely like explored some of those things in the past, but yeah, for me too, like it's yes, this is more about like doing something interesting. Can like you like do something interesting together, and sometimes I just think that like that like I feel like sometimes with big companies there's like so many people involved, and there's so much like complexity to that. Like that's what I've noticed is like you might,
Endless meetings.
yeah, and then like maybe one person's really like you're on the same level, but then like there's like I kind of love like for myself that it's just me working. Like I don't like have any assistants or anything. Like I definitely just do my thing, and it's like I can just be like the true weirdo that I am, and then just make the work, and yeah, just kind of let the work kind of push things into whatever direction. So I found like that, if you have like entire groups of like meetings with people, like it's hard to like maintain that kind of like I don't know what the word, like autonomy or something with that. So it's
Well, you're an artist. You're supposed to be a control freak. I mean, that's a feature, not a bug of being an artist.
yeah, but like someone like I would like, not to keep mentioning Murakami, but I feel like he's someone I love when he does like collab. Like I feel like for some artists that's part of the work, it can be really interesting and like really like kind of push like questions in other ways, and like be like what are these relationships, or like questioning um those things. I think it's like if it's important to just kind of like be doing something interesting in the work, not just like kind of like throwing your aesthetic all over the place or something. That's like for me, like the fear of that is like I'm just like not interested in that, of like just like making like having like a style that is spread around. Like it's the style is just like part of the work. It's not the whole thing.
Well, speaking of style, I also was sort of curious. There's a sort of growing trend of popularity for artists who have a kind of naive style, and there are a number of artists who've become successful recently who are self taught painters, and there's nothing wrong with being self taught. But you are very much not self taught. You went to Yale, and you've chosen a style that is, again, unworldly and all. Is that part of just the emotional content? Is that another kind of aesthetic choice?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I never really think of my work as naive or anything, like, or even the aesthetic. Like, I also don't like some artists that kind of get positioned like that, like self-taught artists. Like, that's like kind of just my favorite work usually. So, it's not like, I just think of it as like as expressive or something, or like it kind of like right to the core. I think, like you mentioned Alex Katz earlier, and like he's someone who I love his work, and I feel like it's like distilling something like an idea down. It's like, what's the simplest way to communicate this? Like, and I think for me, that's more what it is. Like, it's like, what's the like simplest way to share this feeling or this idea? And that's what I'm always trying to do. Like, and like my paintings, I think, I feel like with the, like kind of maybe the airbrush aesthetic and stuff too, sometimes they will get like connected with that. But they're usually pretty, like, I just think for me, it's funny because they're usually like pretty rendered, like digital images. So they look just like they're like me rendering a like a raw digital image, but they're pretty carefully done. And like, even, especially like the new work from like, I'm just like pretty carefully painting like a digital image. And they're like, I almost think of them as like, not like photorealism, but like a pretty realistic depiction of a digital image. So I don't necessarily think of them as like naive or anything, but
Well, I didn't. Not your work. I think. Well, you have these figures that are almost are certainly unreal, but they sort of melt in almost biomorphic shapes and all, and that's part of what I was getting at. Is that part of it? But you also, I mean, I've read somewhere else you made a very sort of clear statement. You spend a lot of time creating things in a digital format, whether it's virtual reality or on an iPad or all, and then take a lot of care to actually render it physically, almost to the point where that becomes kind of a question. why bother? But let's set that one aside for a second.
Sure.
That's sort of what I was getting at with this, that you're taking all of this care with it. You're clearly thinking through these things, not in a naive way, but you are not necessarily using imagery that immediately would reveal to people how much work you're putting into rendering.
Yeah, and I guess yeah, it's hard. It's like it's just a hard thing to talk about because it's like something I like. It's come up before too, and it's like I guess I don't really know. Like even like Dubuffet is like I think a great artist. Like kind of like looking like or like for me, I love children's drawings. Like they're like one of my favorite things. I think people actually learn how to like not connect to themselves over time, and they actually just like learn a lot of like dumb rules, and then they follow these like more boring ways of doing things. Like that's the way I guess that's why I have a hard time thinking about, because like for me that feels like the truer, how do you get deeper connected to like yourself, and like what, like when I see like a really radical weird like children's drawing, it's like wow, that's like that is something like that's for me way more usually impressive if you're like dealing with like the self in that way, like that's like just kind of coming out, like it's like a um like direct idea from your head, like than like a super realistic render drawing of like a
So
figure or
did
something. You
you
know what I mean? Like
Yeah, did you have to unlearn things? I mean, that there's that famous Picasso quote, and about being so naturally gifted as a child, it took him a lifetime to learn how to draw like a child. But people, you don't go to art school necessarily based on the kinds of things that you end up developing. Did you have to learn and then unlearn certain things to be able to draw that way?
yeah, like I mean I'm no Picasso for sure. Like I don't have like drawings when like 14 that look like his drawings, but I definitely like had a, when I was like younger, I had like a style that's pretty connect. I could see is connected to now. Like when I looked at some older drawings recently, and I was kind of trying to like understand that. I think I had like for me, I think I ended up, one thing I have noticed in the work is that I think there's like a playfulness in the work now that maybe wasn't as um on the surface like with that older work. The older work is like a little more like emo or something, I guess would be the and I think I've found like a way to like kind of put like maybe like it's a little bit like that's under the surface, and then I have like a more of a balance where it's like a playfulness that can like let you get to that deeper thing without being like turned off by the like just totally emo thing. But when I look at the early work, like yeah, they're like more that's like the connection that I see. But yeah, I don't know. Like for me, like yeah, going like to like school and stuff. I went to Tyler for undergrad, and that was like I felt like a great experience where I think that school really helped me just explore as an artist and experiment and like not worry too much about like what something looked like, or like just to kind of like question what things are instead of like those assumptions about what something is, like to really try to be like what does this mean, like what does it mean to make this drawing, what does it mean to use you know like whatever, like a
These tools and
painting.
materials, yeah.
Yeah, so for me that's like kind of been like a really healthy like core of like exploration. um so I mean I think over the years I just different people I've met and learned from have added a lot of just different thinking. So for me it's like I don't want to say I never like consciously have tried to unlearn things. It's more like kind of opened up like new ways of thinking, I guess.
And that leads me to color. The certainly in this Like It Is show, the intensity of the color, amplified by the environment that it's in, with these richly colored walls and all. But as we're speaking here behind you in your studio, there's a painting that is kind of a vivid, almost Yves Klein blue, and there are reds and yellows. I mean, you have such intense saturated colors in your work right now. Was that always a feature of it? Is that again part of that exploration?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved color for sure. I think some of the color for me is like sometimes trying to simulate like screen color, like the luminosity of like light, which is like not quite possible with a painting, like because it's it's pigment, so like you have some limitations there. But for me, like that's the fun part is like, oh, color, like the color relationships, like something can like look like crazy bright if it's like one color is next to another color. Like those are like, for me, like the fun challenges is like, how do you make this look like a screen? Like, how do you make a painting look like that? And then I'll, try to figure out different ways, or like even use like older painting techniques like glazing and stuff like that to like, to make something feel more luminous. But colors is like a really emotional thing too. I think that it's like, for me, like one of the easiest ways to like get to a feeling, like where, we just have these like connections with them automatically that are like just from our, like culture or our experiences. So for me, I love just like kind of, not being afraid to use like whatever colors and experiment. So
So one final question you just brought up by that, what you just said about the screens and all as VR becomes more sophisticated, as more people use kind of digital platforms or screens to create art that is, sort of contained in an armature of some kind or just exists digitally, why not work in a digital form? Why not make the stuff you're doing where you're sketching or working in VR or digitally? Why transfer that to canvas? Just because that's the challenge, that's the sort of art of it, and using this old technique and discovering how it can replicate luminosity and all, or is it just because the digital stuff doesn't necessarily have there's not a gallery you can show it in as easily. It doesn't have a sort of place in the world that painting does.
yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that there's like more like multiple reasons. So like one reason, I do think like painting has like a deep history that's really nice to like play within and speak within, like where I think like one like art in itself is like, or at least like painting is like a digital language that's like shared throughout time with with other artists, and it's nice to have that connection to that, like where it's not like just in a vacuum. You can like, you're kind of like sharing this aesthetic language throughout history. So that's like for me one of the just main reasons. It's like really a kind of like beautiful thing, I think, to be like, oh, I'm like using the same. I mean, I'm using like acrylic paint, which is a little different, but I could use like oil paint in theory, that are like the same like actual materials that like people were using like hundreds of years ago to make paintings, like on a surface, like where I think that's kind of cool to be able to have that same connection, to be like, oh, what, like this material hasn't changed, but history's changed. And I think like the images that I'm making, like I don't think someone would even understand what they are like a few hundred years ago, because like they don't have they would be missing all those links in between that time, and like they wouldn't know like what they wouldn't even understand it. Like in the same way, like if you, with like memes, like if you like aren't reading the internet for like 5 months, you like will be way behind on memes and you have no idea what anyone's talking about. Like where I think that's like for me that connect, like what's interesting is like how we have these like through like not just like, it's not just like an individual thing. It's like our understanding of the world is through each other and like through history. So painting is like just like I think a beautiful form to like reflect that onto, like what's going on right now. Like I think that's like kind of one of the points of making art is like, oh, this is like me in the world right now, and then sharing that not just like with the present, but in theory through history. And then the other thing is like, yeah, like it isn't. I think they are just different. Like for me, like painting is different than a digital image, and I'm trying to explore that and poke at that and like try to figure that out. Like I don't have like a hierarchy necessarily, like where I think they're just interesting in different ways. Like for me, like there's strengths and weaknesses to both. Like for me, like with like I love VR. I've been exploring that a lot. I think it's more interesting to me as a tool than as like an experience. Like it's really not. I haven't really had a ton of experiences in VR that were like interesting to me. Like they weren't. I haven't really like felt like, I don't know. Like I haven't experienced a lot of stuff in there that felt natural. But like when I'm like making sculptures or drawing in VR, it feels really natural. It feels more natural than like using clay or something for me. Like it feels like oh, I'm not limited by like gravity. I can do like it's like more connected to like my brain and like the way that I can just make anything I can think of. And then, so I love that about it. I think that's a strength. And then but how do you share that with someone? I don't I'll make it into a sculpture or a painting. Cause I think VR is really isolating too, to have a big headset on and it's not a social thing. It's a very individual thing. So for me, I'm oh, it makes sense to make a painting based on that. And then to make a sculpture, and then people can together look at it or share, sharing that experience in their lived life. And for me, I also just think painting, your experience, looking at a painting is different too. Even for me, when I make the painting, it's that processing of it is it's another step where I'm I might do a sketch and then a VR drawing, and then I'll do bring that into Photoshop, and then I'll make a painting from that. And each step of the way, I'm thinking about what it is again. And so for me, that first impulse is the impulse of just making something, and I don't really know what it is, but I'm just kind of spewing it out. And then every step I can inspect it a little more and be oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I might make changes here and there throughout those process. And I think for me, that's what's kind of interesting is to actually make the painting. Then I've thought about it over and over time. And I've had to rethink about every little inch of the canvas and cause I'm by hand touching every part of it. And then I do think this is a weirder, not I don't know if it's a spiritual thing or something, but I do think the residue of the artist is in the work, with the painting, where, something I can't explain, but I think when you see a painting, you really can feel the artist making it, cause they had to make it, and it's not something that I think I can articulate necessarily, but it's you there's some feeling there. I think the presence of the artist is left behind in some way. And I don't necessarily feel that way with digital. I think I feel that's the part that does feel a little lacking or something still for me. I'm not saying that it's not possible to have that, but it does. I haven't had really that same experience where, I've seen paintings that made me cry and stuff, or really moved me. And I think it is just awareness of a human being doing the thing. Even though on the digital, you still are doing that, but I think there's a lot of removal. You don't really, you can't see that as clearly. The touch isn't as clearly present. But anyway, yeah, those are some of the reasons why I'll make a painting or a sculpture.
That's a pretty good all of the above answer, Austin. And, that's probably the perfect place to end. Thank you so much for doing this. I've learned a lot, and it's been very enjoyable.
Great. Well, yeah, nice to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for joining us at the Artelligence Podcast, edited by Colin Ketchen, who also composed the original music. For more episodes, listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to download the LiveArt app or visit us at liveart.io. Please join us for the next episode of the Artelligence Podcast. We're looking forward to it.